The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Hi there, welcome to Cltv. This week we're going to do a movie review for Wanted, and we're going to do, a wrap-up of the Supreme Court's last week, at least as far as criminal activities went. So, let's get to it. Okay, so let's start out by talking about Wanted. The movie just came out this last week.
Next. How you doing? Hey.
I knew your father.
My father died the week I was born.
Your father died yesterday on the rooftop of the Metropolitan Building. He was one of the greatest assassins who ever lived. Then the other one is behind you.
Welcome to the fraternity. This gun you're holding belonged to your father. He could conduct a symphony orchestra with it.
All right, shoot the target.
How am I supposed to do that?
If no one ever told you that bullets fly straight, what would you do? It is a choice, Wesley, that each of us must face. To remain ordinary, pathetic, beat down, coasting through a miserable existence, like sheep herded by fate. Or you can take control of your own destiny and join us, releasing the caged wolf you have inside. Our purpose is to maintain stability in an unstable world. Kill one, save 1,000. Within the fabric of this world, every life hangs by a thread. We are that thread, a fraternity of assassins, the weapons of fate. This is the decision that lies before you now. The sheep or the wolf? The choice is yours.
It's a movie based on a comic book. Now, I've not read this particular comic book, but I've talked to people who have, and apparently it was pretty doggone depressing. The comic book was very different from the movie. The comic book was, it starts out, and there's some things that are similar to the movie, like, at the beginning, the guy's working in a sea of cubicles, and he's got a dead-end job, and he hates his life. And his girlfriend is having sex with his best friend at his apartment, and he knows about it but is not doing anything about it. All sorts of stuff. I mean, it's just like his life just sucks. So that's fairly similar. But from that point on, the comic book, what happens is he gets contacted by this fraternity of supervillains, and what you find out in the comic book is that in 1986. There was a war between supervillains and superheroes. It took 3 months, and the supervillains either wiped out or incapacitated all the superheroes. There are no more superheroes. Supervillains still exist as a fraternity, a group that basically runs everything. They have somehow convinced the world that none of this ever happened, that there are no such things as superheroes and supervillains, but they're pulling the strings behind the scenes on everything. So, this guy gets brought into this group because his dad was a supervillain who somehow died, and he's taking his dad's place. And it is very violent. It uses a lot of, vile language, and from the thing that, it's like iFanboy, which reviews comic books, talked about this, and they said, the thing that hit them is that, it seemed like every other page there was a rape going on. And what you get is this guy who, is going through being, becoming more and more of a supervillain and doing all these things and getting away with it. At one point, apparently there's a scene where, he goes in and shoots all the police officers in a police precinct just because he's bored. And there's rape scenes and stuff like that. And nothing ever happens because he's part of this fraternity of supervillains, which is running the world. It's interesting kind of comic book. Apparently ended in a way that made a lot of people very upset. But now here's the thing. You know, you're going to go make a movie about this, a movie called Wanted, and based on this comic book. You can just see the guys at whatever big screen company made the movie going, you want us to do what? You don't want the hero to be a hero? You want him to end up being a supervillain? You want supervillains to run the world? What? So basically you end up with a movie that is, well, about a society of weavers who somehow have, over the years, become the society of assassins who are killing for the good of mankind. And some people have figured out that there's something going on that's wrong in the society and the conflict therein. And you start out with this guy in the cubicle, and he ends up choosing to become one of these assassins, not because it's an evil thing, but because it's a good thing, that you kill one to save thousands, is the mantra. And he ends up in it, and there's a big conflict. Nothing at all like the movie, or like the comic book. There are punitive good guys here, even if they are doing short-term bad things. If you've never seen the comic and don't care, which probably most of you haven't and don't, it's a good, go in, sit down, turn off your brain, listen to things go boom, kapow, boom, boom for 2 hours, and walk out going, how in the world did they tie that many bombs to rats? It's that kind of a movie. I say it's a matinee. Don't waste your money paying more than that. But if you are a real big fan of that set of comic books, which I'm not sure why you would be, you're probably not going to enjoy the movie. So that's my review, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get on to some more serious conversation. Okay, so let's talk about the Supreme Court's decisions this last week, or at least the ones that have some criminal law implications. And we're going to start out with, I'll talk about Heller, but I'm going to talk about Heller a little bit later. First I'm going to start talking about Kennedy against Louisiana. And Kennedy against Louisiana was the child rape statute case. As anybody who's gone through law school knows, at a certain point, rape used to be a death penalty offense. At a certain point, the Supreme Court of the United States said, no, can't do it, because the victim has the ability to recover in a rape case, and it's not a definitive final thing. It has to be, murder has to be the intent in order for a death penalty to apply. Well, in recent years, a lot of states have started playing with that, pushing back. And the way they were pushing back was by saying, well, it said rape, it meant adult rape, we're going to make rape of a child a death penalty offense. Obviously, like I said, they're pushing back against the Supreme Court, and I think 7 or 8 states had passed this statute. Now, those of you who know me, or watched me, or read my blog for any period of time, know I'm not a big fan of the death penalty. I think it's an act of last resort. However, when Kennedy against Louisiana rules against the death penalty, its reasoning is just pure BS. Now, of course, there's a lot of sophistry, and you can come up with all sorts of reasons to say, that their decision is a good decision. But the reality is that it's talking about evolving standards of decency. And what this decision stands for, it doesn't stand, well, obviously it stands for the very practical idea that, child rape cannot be punished by death. But what this decision stands for is evolving standards of decency can only move in one direction. They can, with the death penalty, and this may be different for other areas of the law, but for the death penalty, evolving standards of decency can only move in one direction, and that is for fewer applications of the death penalty. That's it. Got it. there's your standard for this case. Evolving standards of decency can only move in the direction of less death penalty application. So that distills, the Louisiana case, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move on to the California case. Next case, ladies and gentlemen, is Giles against Commonwealth, or Giles against Commonwealth. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. This case is about forfeiture of confrontation in the courtroom. And what we've got here is a case where an ex-boyfriend shoots an ex-girlfriend and he claims self-defense. Well, in order at least partially to rebut this, the prosecution introduces a statement that the ex-girlfriend had given in a domestic abuse call 3 weeks earlier, in which she said that ex-boyfriend, or at that time boyfriend, had threatened to kill her if he caught her cheating. Okay, now the California courts said, okay, that's fine, because him shooting her to death meant that she was not going to be available for confrontation, and it was a consequence of his act. Therefore, the statement could be introduced. This goes up through the California courts, gets to the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, no, that's not the way the confrontation clause works. It says, in order to confront, the act has to be, by the defendant, has to be specifically tailored to keep the person from testifying. In other words, he has to bribe them, have them kidnapped, have them shot, with the idea that they will not be available in court to testify. Then their testimony can come in. If it's the defendant's fault that the witness is not available, but the defendant did not act with the purpose of keeping the victim from testifying, then the victim's statements cannot come in. That's going to be an interesting one, and see how that shakes out in courts. And finally, we get to D.C. against Heller. And D.C. against Heller is a case wherein, D.C.'s handgun ban was challenged. And D.C.'s handgun ban is thrown out. The Supreme Court says there's a personal right for personal defense of having a firearm, a handgun, have to be able to have it in the house, have to be able to have it in a functional form in the house, because apparently D.C., on top of not letting people have handguns, also said that if you had a handgun or a gun in your house, it had to be rendered non-functional. And the Supreme Court says, nope, can't have either of those strictures. So it kicks it out. Kind of interesting. I'm not sure. Well, I mean, this is going to open a Pandora's box. There's going to be a lot of cases out there, because now they have separated the purpose clause and the action clause of the constitutional amendment, which I think is proper. I mean, the purpose clause is there, says this is why we're doing it, but it doesn't actually modify the action clause, and the action clause says this is the right, and the right is to bear arms. Now, I think that I've heard some people say that this doesn't apply to X or Y, and somehow Miller applies here to say that, well, if there were weapons that should only go to the militia, they should only be with the militia, cannons, stuff like that. I beg to differ. Of course, I'm a textualist. I don't buy all this originalist bunk any more than I buy, the legislative history bunk. I buy what you can get out of the text. And the text here says right to bear arms. And the way I read that, if I can afford to have an Abrams parking out in my yard, I can have an Abrams. And if anybody wants to donate the money that I could possibly have to buy an Abrams, while not guaranteeing that I would buy an Abrams, I would appreciate the money. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to raise a lot of interesting arguments. They got other way to say that felons, violent felons, etc., can't have firearms. It's going to be interesting to see where all this plays out. And so that's what the Supreme Court did on its last day. It did some civil stuff too, but haven't bothered to read those, so I can't tell you about them. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this week. Next week, we'll see what I can scare up to talk about then. Have a good week.